What happens when Hollywood's most iconic space captain meets late-night television's most ruthless comedian, and neither one backs down from a fight? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had security rushing onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set and left one legendary actor storming off in fury. This is the untold story of how a simple book promotion turned into television's most shocking meltdown. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story gets wilder by the minute. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Cameras rolled, the audience settled into their seats, and Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie one final time before addressing the crowd with his trademark smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, my next guest needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway because that's literally my job," Kimmel began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of enthusiasm and barely contained mischief. "He's boldly gone where no man has gone before, both in space and in acting choices that make us question the very fabric of reality. Please welcome the one, the only, William Shatner." The audience erupted in applause as Shatner emerged from backstage, his distinctive gait carrying him across the studio floor. At 89 years old, he moved with the confidence of a man who had commanded starships and conquered Hollywood, his silver hair perfectly styled and his eyes sharp with intelligence. He raised his hand in acknowledgement of the crowd's enthusiasm, that familiar Shatner smile spreading across his weathered features. "Jimmy, thank you for having me," Shatner said as he approached the guest chair, his voice carrying that unmistakable cadence that had made him famous. "It's always a pleasure to be here with you and your wonderful audience." Kimmel gestured toward the chair with theatrical flourish. "The pleasure is all mine, Bill. Can I call you Bill? Or do you prefer Captain Kirk? Or should I go with Commander Shatner, given your recent real-life space adventures?" "William will be just fine," Shatner replied, settling into the chair with practiced ease. "Though I must say the spaceflight was quite remarkable. That's actually why I'm here tonight, to talk about my new book documenting that incredible experience." Right, the book," Kimmel nodded, picking up a copy from his desk. "Boldly Go, Reflections on a Life of Awe and Wonder." Catchy title. How should I put this? Very you. Something in Kimmel's tone caused Shatner's eyes to narrow slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm proud of it, Jimmy. It's a deeply personal reflection on what it means to actually travel beyond our atmosphere, to see Earth from space with your own eyes, rather than through a television screen." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with that look he got when he was about to pounce. "But let's be honest here, Bill. Sorry, William. When you went up in that Blue Origin rocket, were you thinking about the profound spiritual implications of space travel? Or were you thinking, holy crap, I'm actually doing this Kirk thing for real?" The audience chuckled, but Shatner's expression remained serious. "I was thinking about the incredible privilege I had been given, Jimmy. To see our planet from that perspective, to understand our place in the universe in a way that very few human beings ever have. It was transformative." "Transformative," Kimmel repeated, nodding sagely. "That's a big word. Did you practice saying it in your trademark Shatner style? Or did it just come naturally? You know, transformative?" The audience laughed louder this time, but Shatner's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Jimmy." "Oh, come on, William," Kimmel said, leaning forward now, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "You're telling me that when you were floating around up there in zero gravity, you didn't even once think to yourself, 'These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise'? Not even a little bit?" "The experience was far more profound than any fictional television show, Jimmy," Shatner replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "This was real. This was actual space travel, not some soundstage in Hollywood." "Right. Right, of course," Kimmel said, nodding with exaggerated understanding. "But here's what I'm curious about. Did you bring your phaser? Did you scan for Klingons? Did you try to communicate with any alien life forms using your patented Kirk hand gestures? As Kimmel demonstrated an exaggerated version of Kirk's hand movements, the audience roared with laughter. But Shatner was no longer smiling. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his eyes had taken on a distinctly unfriendly gleam. Jimmy, I came here tonight to have a serious conversation about space exploration and the future of human achievement, Shatner said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that anyone who had worked with him over the years would recognize as a warning sign. I didn't come here to be mocked. Mocked? Kimmel raised his eyebrows in apparent surprise. Who's mocking? I'm just having a little fun. That's what we do here. We have fun. Don't tell me Captain Kirk can't take a joke. I am not Captain Kirk, Shatner snapped, his composure finally cracking. I am William Shatner, and I have had a career spanning 7 decades in this industry. I have earned the right to be treated with respect, not turned into some kind of cartoon character for your amusement. The audience fell silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Even Kimmel seemed momentarily taken aback by the vehemence in Shatner's voice, but he recovered quickly, that predatory smile returning to his face. Easy there, Captain, Kimmel said, deliberately using the title Shatner had just rejected. No need to set phasers to kill. We're all friends here. Shatner's eyes flashed dangerously. Are we, Jimmy? Because it feels like you brought me here under false pretenses. You told my people this would be a serious interview about my book and my spaceflight experience. Instead, you're treating me like some kind of novelty act. Hey, you want serious? Kimmel leaned forward, his own voice taking on a sharper tone. Let's get serious. You're 89 years old, and you just spent 11 minutes in a glorified roller coaster that barely qualified as space flight. Meanwhile, actual astronauts are spending months on the International Space Station doing real science. But sure, let's pretend your joyride was some kind of profound spiritual journey. The tension in the studio became palpable. Shatner's face flushed red, and he leaned forward in his chair, his voice rising. That joyride, as you call it, represented the culmination of decades of human ingenuity and scientific advancement. It was a privilege and an honor that I will treasure for the rest of my life. Oh, please, Kimmel scoffed. It was a publicity stunt. You went up there because someone was willing to pay you to do it, and now you're trying to sell books about your 11 minutes of weightlessness like you're some kind of space pioneer. How dare you? Shatner growled, his hands clenching into fists. How dare you diminish something that meant everything to me? The words hung in the air like smoke from a phaser blast. Kimmel's smirk faltered for just a moment, as he realized he might have pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now. The audience watched in stunned silence as two entertainment legends squared off in what was rapidly becoming the most uncomfortable television moment in recent memory. Oh, I'm sorry, Kimmel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Did I hurt the feelings of the great William Shatner? The man who turned overacting into an art form and somehow convinced the world it was genius? Shatner's face went from red to purple. Overacting? Overacting? His voice reached that crescendo that had made him famous, but this time there was genuine rage behind it instead of theatrical drama. I created one of the most beloved characters in television history. I gave Captain Kirk life, soul, and meaning that resonated with millions of people around the world. You gave Captain Kirk a speech impediment and a tendency to pause dramatically in the middle of every sentence, Kimmel shot back, now fully committed to the battle. Let's not pretend that your, shall we say, unique delivery style was some kind of artistic choice. You talked like that because you couldn't remember your lines. The audience gasped audibly. Even for Jimmy Kimmel, this was brutal territory. But Shatner wasn't about to take it lying down. You want to talk about forgetting lines, Jimmy? Shatner leaned forward, his eyes blazing. At least I had lines worth remembering. What exactly is your contribution to entertainment? Making fun of people better than you? Creating comedy out of other people's achievements and failures? My contribution? Kimmel laughed, but there was an edge to it now. I've been hosting successful television shows for over 20 years. I've interviewed presidents, movie stars, and yes, even washed-up actors who think a brief trip to the edge of space makes them astronauts. Washed up? Shatner's voice dropped to a whisper, which somehow made it more menacing than when he was shouting. Washed up? I was making movies and television shows when you were still wetting your bed. You pathetic excuse for a comedian. Movies? Kimmel seized on the word like a shark smelling blood. Oh, you mean classics like Star Trek V, The Final Frontier? The one you directed yourself into cinematic oblivion? Or maybe you're referring to your singing career? Should we play a clip of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds for the audience? The mention of his notorious spoken-word recording hit Shatner like a physical blow. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. You smug, self-satisfied little man. You think you're so clever, don't you? Hiding behind your desk, making jokes about people who actually have talent. Talent? Kimmel's voice rose to match Shatner's intensity. Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you've been dining out. On one roll for 50 years. Captain Kirk was lightning in a bottle, and you've spent half a century trying to recapture that magic and failing spectacularly. At least I've created something that will outlast me, Shatner snapped. What's your legacy going to be, Jimmy? A collection of mean-spirited interviews and cheap shots at your betters? My betters. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, abandoning any pretense of maintaining the show's format. You think you're better than me? You're a has-been who's so desperate for relevance that you'll strap yourself to a rocket just to get people talking about you again. Shatner rose from his chair as well, and suddenly the two men were facing each other across the coffee table like gunfighters at high noon. The audience held its collective breath, unsure whether they were witnessing television history or about to see an actual physical altercation. Desperate for relevance? Shatner's voice shook with fury. I've been relevant longer than you've been alive. I was exploring strange new worlds while you were still trying to figure out which end of a microphone to speak into. Oh, please, Kimmel shot back. You've been playing the same character for decades because it's the only thing you know how to do. Even in real life, you can't stop being Captain Kirk. That's not versatility. That's tragedy. You want to see tragedy? Shatner took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. Look in the mirror, you second-rate talk show host. You're nothing but a pale imitation of Johnny Carson, trying to stay relevant by tearing down people who actually accomplished something with their lives. Second-rate? Kimmel's face flushed red. I've hosted the Academy Awards multiple times. I've interviewed every major celebrity of the past 2 decades. I've built an empire while you've been making commercials for discount hotels and appearing at comic book conventions. Those comic book conventions are filled with people who understand what real entertainment looks like, Shatner fired back. They appreciate artistry and creativity, unlike the mindless sheep who watch your show and laugh at your juvenile humor. Juvenile humor? Kimmel stepped around his desk, closing the distance between them. At least my humor doesn't involve dramatically pausing in the middle of every sentence like I'm having a stroke. At least I don't need a teleprompter to remember how to breathe. The insult about his age and mental capacity was the final straw. Shatner's composure, already hanging by a thread, snapped completely. You arrogant little weasel. You wouldn't last 5 minutes doing what I do. You hide behind your writers and your editing team because you don't have an original thought in your head. Original thoughts? Kimmel laughed harshly. Coming from the man who's been recycling the same performance for 50 years? You've got some nerve talking about originality when your entire career is based on one lucky break that happened when Nixon was president. That lucky break, as you call it, changed science fiction forever, Shatner shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. It inspired generations of scientists, astronauts, and dreamers. What has your career inspired? A few cheap laughs and some Twitter hashtags? You know what, William? Kimmel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. The only thing your career has inspired is pity. Pity for a once great actor who can't accept that his time is over. Pity for a man so desperate to stay in the spotlight that he'll humiliate himself on national television just to sell a few books. The studio fell dead, silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving, afraid that any sound might shatter the tense atmosphere. Shatner's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breathing labored with rage. For a moment, it looked like he might actually strike the talk show host. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He smiled. "You know what, Jimmy?" Shatner's voice became eerily calm, the sudden shift more unnerving than his previous shouting. "You're absolutely right about one thing. My time in the spotlight is coming to an end. But at least when I'm gone, people will remember me for creating something beautiful. Something that brought joy and wonder to millions of lives." He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering his final blow. "When you're gone, the only thing people will remember is that you were the talk show host who was so insecure about his own mediocrity that he spent his entire career trying to tear down his betters. And that, my friend, is the real tragedy here." Kimmel's face went through a spectrum of emotions as Shatner's words hit their target. First came surprise, then hurt, and finally a cold fury that transformed his features into something his audience had never seen before. The affable late-night host disappeared, replaced by someone far more dangerous. "You want to talk about legacy, William?" Kimmel's voice was deadly quiet, each word precisely enunciated. "Let's talk about your real legacy. Let's talk about how you treated your fellow actors on Star Trek. How you hogged camera time, rewrote scripts to give yourself more lines, and made life miserable for everyone else on that set." Shatner's confident smile began to waver. "That's not true. Those are lies spread by jealous actors who never achieved what I achieved." "Lies?" Kimmel pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Really? Because I've got Leonard Nimoy's autobiography right here in digital form, and he had some very interesting things to say about your behavior. Should I read some excerpts to our audience?" "Don't you dare," Shatner snarled, but there was panic creeping into his voice now. "Leonard was my friend. We made peace years ago." "Oh, you made peace after he called you out publicly for being impossible to work with," Kimmel continued, his thumb scrolling through the digital pages. "And what about Nichelle Nichols? Grace Lee Whitney? George Takei has been telling stories about your ego for decades. Should we call him up right now and ask him to share some behind-the-scenes memories?" "Those people are bitter," Shatner shot back, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "They're envious of my success." "Your success?" Kimmel laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. "You mean your success at alienating everyone you've ever worked with? Your success at turning yourself into a walking punchline? Your success at becoming so desperate for attention that you'll literally shoot yourself into space for publicity?" "I earned my place in entertainment history," Shatner insisted, but he was backing away from Kimmel now, his earlier aggression crumbling under the talk show host's relentless assault. "You earned your place, all right," Kimmel continued, advancing on him like a predator. "You earned your place as Hollywood's most notorious egomaniac. Do you know what people in this industry really call you, William? They call you the cautionary tale. The perfect example of what happens when talent gets completely consumed by narcissism." "That's enough," Shatner's voice cracked slightly. "I don't have to listen to this character assassination." "Character assassination?" Kimmel's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "I'm not assassinating your character, William. I'm simply describing it. There's a difference. And speaking of character, let's talk about your personal life. 3 divorces, public feuds with your children, lawsuits with former business partners. What exactly have you created besides a trail of broken relationships and burned bridges?" The color drained from Shatner's face. My personal life is none of your business. It became my business the moment you walked onto my stage and started lecturing me about legacy and artistic contribution. Kimmel fired back. You want to compare legacies? Fine. I've built a show that employs hundreds of people, raises millions, for charity every year, and brings joy to millions of viewers every night. What have you done lately besides trade on the memory of a character you played half a century ago? I've had a career spanning 7 decades, Shatner repeated weakly, but the fire had gone out of his voice. Yes, a career built on one role. Kimmel pressed his advantage mercilessly. Everything else has been a pale imitation or an outright disaster. Your movies bombed, your music career was a joke, your novels were unreadable, and your reality shows were embarrassing. The only reason anyone still cares about William Shatner is because Captain Kirk was bigger than you ever were. Stop, Shatner whispered, but Kimmel wasn't finished. You know what the real tragedy is, William? You could have been remembered as a beloved icon. You could have gracefully accepted your place in television history and been cherished by fans forever. Instead, you chose to become a bitter, egotistical has-been who attacks anyone who doesn't worship at your feet. Shatner's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he reached for the back of his chair for support. I said stop. And this space flight? Kimmel continued, his voice rising now as he sensed complete victory. This pathetic attempt to recapture your youth and relevance? It's not inspiring, William. It's sad. It's a 90-year-old man so desperate to matter again that he'll risk his life for a few minutes of weightlessness and some media attention. Enough! Shatner roared. But it was the roar of a wounded animal, not a confident predator. I don't have to take this abuse from a talentless hack who makes a living mocking his betters. Betters? Kimmel laughed again, and this time there was genuine amusement in it. William, look around. Look at this studio. Look at this audience. Look at this show that I built from nothing. Then look at yourself, a washed-up actor begging for relevance on late-night television. Who exactly is who's better here? The truth of those words hit Shatner like a physical blow. He looked around the studio, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time. The cameras, the lights, the audience, all focused on Kimmel. This was Kimmel's domain, his kingdom, and Shatner was just a guest who had overstayed his welcome. You're right, Shatner said quietly, so quietly that the audience had to strain to hear him. You're absolutely right. I am washed up, I am desperate, and I am pathetic. The admission stunned everyone in the studio, including Kimmel, who had been expecting another explosion of rage, not this sudden collapse. I came here tonight thinking I was still somebody important, Shatner continued, his voice growing stronger, but filled with a bitter self-awareness. I thought people still cared about William Shatner, still respected what I'd accomplished. But you've made it very clear that I'm nothing but a punchline, a relic from a bygone era that nobody takes seriously anymore. William, I didn't mean... Kimmel started, but Shatner cut him off with a gesture. No, you meant every word, and you were right to say it. I've spent so many years believing my own publicity that I forgot the difference between William Shatner the person and Captain Kirk the character. I forgot that the character was created by writers, brought to life by an entire cast and crew, and that my contribution, while important, was just one part of something much larger. The studio was dead silent now, everyone transfixed by this unexpected moment of vulnerability from a man they'd just watched being systematically destroyed. But you know what, Jimmy? Shatner's voice took on a different quality now, sadder but somehow more dignified. Even if everything you've said about me is true, even if I am a has-been and a punchline and a cautionary tale, I still gave people something that meant something to them. I still brought a character to life that inspired generations of dreamers and explorers. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. He straightened up, some of his old presence returning despite the emotional devastation of the previous few minutes. I'm going to leave now, Jimmy. Not because you're throwing me off your show, but because I have some dignity left, and I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you for the reminder of who I really am. It was long overdue." Shatner turned toward the exit, but Kimmel's voice stopped him. "William, wait. I think maybe I went too far." "No," Shatner said without turning around. "You went exactly as far as you needed to go. Goodbye, Jimmy. Enjoy your empire while it lasts. They all end eventually." And with that, William Shatner walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage for the last time, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shell-shocked host, and one of the most brutal verbal exchanges in late-night television history. As the credits rolled, in awkward silence, viewers at home were left wondering if they had just witnessed the end of a legend or the birth of one. Either way, it was television they would never forget. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Drop a comment below and let me know if you think Kimmel went too far, or if Shatner had it coming, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal the shocking truth behind Hollywood's biggest moments.